Hello world, I'm John Bruni and you're listening to Strategikon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. In this episode of Strategikon, we are joined by Susie Jones and Adam Selwood. Susie is CEO of Melbourne-based cybersecurity firm Cynch, and Adam is Cynch Chief Technology Officer. As our last two episodes dealing with the June cyber attack against Australia demonstrated, the cyber domain is becoming an increasing focus for the Australian government and domestic companies. While the good money seems to be that we have been and continue to be targeted by China, considering our strategic ties to the US and our increasing political differences with Beijing, there are other nefarious actors out there, such as transnational criminals, political radicals and extremist groups, and just people who like to do bad things on the net. All of these actors have capacities that can threaten our safety and security online. So today we turn to Susie and Adam to get Cynch's take on the Australian cyber environment, what's working and what isn't. Joining us via Zoom in our virtual studio today is co-host David Olney. Hello, David.
Hello, John. Hello, everyone, and hello, listeners. I am real. I am not virtual.
And our producer virtually, Tim.
Coming to you virtually. Thank you for having me.
All right. Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategikon can be found on the Ozcast Network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and on the Sage International Australia website. For those of you in our audience who would like to watch our podcast rather than listen to it, please check out our podcast on the Strategikon Raw YouTube channel. Okay, so obviously the first question which I will direct to both of our guests are how things are going for you in Melbourne business-wise. COVID-19 has emerged as a major problem for the Andrews government. And while listening to ABC News Radio this morning, it seems that businesses, small, medium, and large, are closing down all over the state of Victoria. Some are saying that the economy of Victoria has suffered irreparable damage due to the latest COVID shutdown. This is indeed grim news. Who would like to have the first go at this?
I'll throw that one to you, Susie.
Yeah, I thought you might. First of all, thank you very much for having us. It certainly is pretty grim times. For our business, we look to serve micro and small businesses, and I think by all accounts, they've been hardest hit by this pandemic over the last 5 or 6 months. So for us, business has been rocky. Whether it's simply because we're eternal optimists, I don't know, but we do feel like we will continue to grow out of this. But it's really hard. It's hard talking to our customers every day and hearing how tough it is for them. And then, of course, keeping morale high in a team when we haven't actually been face-to-face in 5 months is also tricky.
Adam?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging time for everyone. And we as a business, we focus on trying to help other businesses deal with what we feel is a serious existential risk to them and to the economy. But trying to have that conversation in the midst of a global pandemic is just it's not the time, it's not the place. Really now's the time for us to just focus on supporting businesses and helping them come out the other side of it. Fortunately, I think a lot of businesses and a lot of our members and customers are resilient and they'll come through the other side. But yeah, certainly the stage 4 lockdowns we've all entered into is going to be a massive hit to many of them. And hopefully it doesn't carry on past the 6 weeks, really. That's what we're all hoping, that everyone starts to do the right thing and we come out bigger and better on the other side.
Yeah. With more and more people having migrated from work in offices to working remotely from home because of the COVID-19 outbreak, how has this changed Australia's cyber environment?
Yeah, that's been the biggest shift, I think, through this whole pandemic period. The reality is back in like March or even late February when we were starting to look at it, that was the thing that we identified that every business was going to have to face into, whether or not they shut down. How do we continue to operate and switch to remote working? That came on a lot quicker than we were expecting. We were thinking it would be drawn out sort of over time, but the government pulled the pin and started to direct people to work from home, which is really good in hindsight and what needed to happen. But a lot of businesses were caught on the back foot and having to just really make some really quick short, sharp decisions, and still dealing with the consequences of that now. And the reality is that so many businesses have just rightly shifted to remote working, but not necessarily had the opportunity to stop and think about the consequences or do it in the best possible way to protect themselves. So at some stage, it's either one of two things is going to happen. They're going to find the opportunity to reprioritize and start to look at the risks that's introduced, or they're going to deal with the consequences of not addressing the risk. And so the reality is remote working has completely shifted the posture of every business that's really rapidly had to make that change. And it's going to be a problem for a long time to come, I think.
I think also it's introduced risks that really were either very low or hardly present at all in different industries. So the obvious one to look at is healthcare. Telehealth capabilities have been around for many, many years, but because for something so simple as it didn't have a Medicare ID number, it really hadn't been adopted here in Australia. And then virtually overnight, Medicare started to allow claims for telehealth, and an entire industry adopted a new technology. But they didn't just adopt one, they all adopted different versions of a similar technology. And so that means from a security perspective, there's a whole bunch of risks that have been introduced to industries that some might say we're ill prepared to even be thinking about what those risks are.
David?
Susie and Adam, if we look back historical, it's quite clear that in the United States, 9/11 was the first quarter where Amazon ever made money, because suddenly people were afraid to go outside and started shopping online. So that was kind of the point where the Americans woke up to living life online and solving problems online. Have we had an equivalent event historically, or is really this year our ground zero of the entire world has to move online?
My opinion is absolutely this is the first time in Australia that we've experienced this kind of event to change behaviours so quickly and what I would say is so permanently. For many businesses that had actively resisted allowing their staff and their teams to work from home said, no, we couldn't possibly do that. We have all these processes that couldn't translate to remote working, and then bang, overnight, sure, they can. And even if it's simply because now the staff are aware that they can and will resist returning to work all the time, I think there's a very big transition that will open up a stack of opportunities for businesses big and small. But certainly I don't think we've seen anything like this before, and fingers crossed we don't see another one like it.
You can pick your industry, you'll find some significant shift that's gone on. Even hospitality, everyone having to move to doing online ordering and delivering and those types of things. Who would have thought that speaking to a cafe owner last year, that the first priority that they would have this week is how do I exist in a world where I can't take customers? The retail sector, massive in Melbourne now. Everyone, it's order online and click and collect, or shut your doors, stop selling. So everyone's having to completely shift to not just supporting or potentially one day looking at doing things online. In many cases now, that is the default, and that's the starting position. So it'll be really interesting to see how businesses transition back, or if they transition back on the other side of it.
I just want to ask, how do you think the transition from working remotely, from going to a physical space like an office, has been in terms of raising the risk profile of cyber for Australia? We've just come out of this major cyber attack, and it's easy for us guys who look at international relations to see the big enemy as China or Russia doing their usual thing to try to unseat or destabilize the West. But of course, there are a whole heap of other actors out there that may see opportunity in what we're doing and what the rest of the international community is doing by transiting from physical work to remote work. Because now, aren't we stretching the internet way too thin? I mean, we never planned for this. So yes, it's great that we've rapidly jumped on the bandwagon and we've adapted very quickly. But just as we're quickly adapting to all the good things, there are going to be those bad guys out there who are also adapting to find out how they can undercut, undermine, and otherwise destabilize the system, right?
Absolutely, and we've already seen plenty of evidence for that. As of a month ago, ScamWatch had already seen 3,300 different scams pop up since the beginning of the pandemic, and they weren't perpetrated by nation-state actors. They were perpetrated by dime a dozen cyber criminals that just want to swindle you out of a few $1,000s. So when it comes to the media and the hype talking about China, whilst of course it's potentially a very large threat, not wanting to get political here, but it's a real threat for your mum and dad businesses, for your lawyers, your financial planners, your accountants, your GPs. They're not the ones that they need to be worried about. They need to be worried about the ones that are going to be trying to convince somebody to click on the wrong link, to go to the wrong website, to enter in their password into a dodgy site. They're the sorts of things that are taking everybody each and every day. And 99% of all incidents actually require a human to do something. It needs you to click on a link. And most of the time that's not a nation state.
And so many more different opportunities, I guess, to target smaller organizations or businesses that have had to rapidly move online as well. Again, come back to there's been plenty of examples out there of people's websites where they're taking online orders, getting credit card skimming going on there, and all sorts of things like that. If that's not already happening, it's about to start happening en masse, as more and more online ordering sites pop up and, don't get patched and don't get maintained and don't get monitored, those types of things. There's also just the prevalent or the increased pressure and stress that everyone is under right now. That is introducing all sorts of challenges. Even if we could all locate in work out of the same place, the pressure and stress means that we're all going to be making mistakes. We're all going to be doing shortcuts. Things are going to turn up online that really shouldn't be online. Things are going to get sent to the wrong place and get leaked out there. And the implications on that, not just on sort of actual people attacking and targeting, but mistakes occurring, things being misconfigured in the wrong way. All of that is just going to sort of compound and get, worse and worse and worse, unfortunately. And again, hopefully we get to a point where we can start to address it, but it's going to be unfortunately worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Speaking of that, the responsibility to look after the cyber domain obviously falls primarily within the government, right? So basically we look at the Australian Cybersecurity Centre for guidance. We look at, the Australian Signals Directorate for guidance, and we hope that they manage to pull everything together. But ultimately, the question that I have is, at what point does government stop being the thing that is the primary caretaker of our cyberspace, and what role does the individual have to play now? Because it is such a diffuse environment, it is stretched to the limit, and can government be across everything? I mean, what about the whole of government enterprise, for instance? I mean, I think that there's this idea that perhaps those experts who are in the field right now have a good grasp of what the country needs to defend itself against, like cyber intrusions from China or Russia, but perhaps with all the other possible intrusions from other nefarious sources, that's a grab bag of a lot of stuff, right?
Yep.
I must say, I would argue that I don't think it's ever been the government's responsibility. I don't think they've ever been number one responsible for this risk. There may be very well a common belief out there that they are, but I think the responsibility lies firstly in the hands of whoever it is that asked for data that belonged to somebody else in the first place. If you've accepted and taken data of somebody else's, then you are responsible for protecting that, no matter what your role is within a company, no matter where you sit. Similarly, if you're employing staff, and so therefore you have their sensitive banking information or health information, the moment you accept that information, it is your responsibility to protect it. I think government certainly has a role to play, and the insights and the information that the ACSC and the ASD provide has a critical role to play. But I certainly would never say that if government was number one responsible for the risk that lies within every business. I'm sure Adam would say the same thing.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Go for it, Adam. Yeah. Okay, Adam, go ahead. Finish your sentence.
That's right. So I was just going to say, it's like I think government has a really important role to play when it comes to cybersecurity of the nation. Like it is fundamental that government does take a leading role, set the tone, set the conversation, take care of the things that they're responsible for is a really important thing, and be mindful of the impacts and the implications of anything that they do or don't do when it comes to cybersecurity or cybercrime or anything really. But I 100% agree with Susie on the other side of that, though, is that ultimately it's a risk. It's a business risk. It's a risk that we all have as citizens as well, and we all need to take some sort of significant responsibility for that. In our patch where we're talking to and working with smaller businesses in particular, they have never seen government as responsible for the risk. They have either ignored or not had an opportunity to wrap their head around what the risk is yet. And possibly that's because, they're not digitally native, or they're not online enough. But once they get there, they inherently recognize and realize that it's not just a risk for them and for their business. It's a risk for them personally. They're completely wrapped up in that. And at no point have I ever had a conversation with a small business operator and them said, you know what, the government should do more here. The conversation is always, this is a risk. We need to get on top of it. Tell me what I need to do. Let's do it. And that's without question. Helping businesses recognize the urgency and the need to get on top of that and understand what that risk is. I think that's an important role within government, and certainly pushing or giving some steer around things like standards and obligations and clarifying that for businesses. I think it would be helpful. And then also, I think it's great that the Prime Minister got up on TV and sort of shared the fact that there's stuff going on, because how else would a small business or a business of any size, anyone outside of this ecosystem, know that this sort of stuff is going on? So it's, I think, important that they're out there making it clear that this sort of stuff is happening. But ultimately, it is just a hodgepodge of stuff all over the place. The government can't on their own fix it, and neither should they try to. They need to work across the entire economy to actually try to make that work. Okay.
Tim, and then David.
Given that we're kind of dealing with this risk management on a private level as you guys are you finding that part of the solution may end up being a loss of net neutrality? Is there some risk that, with the extra costs that come with, let's say, securitizing our internet connections and usage, that it would be conducive to something like conducive to not or losing our net neutrality in some sense? I'm not sure if that's too political, but
no, it's if you take it from the context of a business, ultimately the business wants to, once they recognize the risk, they want to manage the risk. Take it from an organization, take it from a government department, whatever that might be. The realities are that if you go to work within an organization right now, of any size or style, that there is a likelihood that they've already put in place filters and things that are essentially undermining your net neutrality, right? You can't just go and access anything. You're not going to go into the office and start looking up porn. You're going to get blocked. You're going to get reported. Something's going to happen. I think for us as citizens to assume that and that's risk management ultimately within the context of that. Stepping outside of that as a citizen, then connecting via clean pipes or whatever it might be that then prevents me from accessing certain things. There's problems there around net neutrality, and that needs to be considered, discussed, and so on and so forth. But equally, even a private context, I've got filtering set up on my home DNS. I stop things from going out the same way, but that's me as an individual making that risk decision. And I have the ability to do that. So I think certainly we don't want to get to the point where we end up having the Great Firewall of China in place in Australia, or some of these other things going on. We should be actively trying to avoid that situation. But I think in the context of business, in the context of government, I think it would be you don't have net neutrality today there. So kind of need to weigh that up.
David?
Just to use a historical example here, if we look back to the 19th century when we had enough medical knowledge to realise that public hygiene was important, government had to set the standards, and initially government had to teach public hygiene. So if we look at the hack of Estonia in whatever it was, 2007, 2008, we see again the government took responsibility for setting the standard and for making digital hygiene something that every Estonian citizen had to know and appreciate the value of. Have we essentially got to the point where the standard on digital hygiene is clear and people know where to look to get the information, or are we still in the digital equivalent of people not washing their hands?
I would certainly say we're in the digital equivalent of people not washing their hands, and I think that's pretty clear. But I think there's a few reasons for that. First of all, it's not as simple as telling everybody to wash their hands, because everybody's hands are basically the same, right? Everybody's technical and digital footprint is essentially different, and it's individualized. So you can't just give the digital version of wash your hands, because it's different for every technology. The solution and the way to protect it is different for every technology. So it's not as simple as that. And so that makes the issue far more complex, and also increases, and perhaps this is an Australian cultural issue, but also increases the apathy. They're very much, oh, it's all too hard, whatever, Facebook already has my information, forget about it. And what Adam and I quite often talk about in Australia, the whole she'll be right approach. It is rife in our society, in our culture. And unfortunately, our government has not done anything to overcome that. It was absolutely astonishing to see Scott Morrison stand up in June and make that statement around the cyber attacks. It should not be astonishing in the year 2020 to hear a Prime Minister talking about cybersecurity, but it absolutely was. So there are many, many ways that our society and the way that we interact with one another, the way that we interact with technology, means that there is no hard and fast wash your hands solution to this. The problem is that we're not even trying. What I would say, there's very little being done. There is, in the last 2 years, the federal government have done more than what had ever been done before, and there's a lot of resources now available on cyber.gov.au, but it is still so generic. It is high level, basically headlines of do this, but the next step of how to do this is completely omitted, because you need to be doing it technology by technology. And that, I think, is the big issue. Is there's no point telling somebody about a problem if you're not going to help them find the solution.
Is that essentially the point where you guys had to jump in? Sorry to cut you off, Adam.
No,
is this why you guys got frustrated and started your own company, because you just saw that constant gap in the how-to?
That was a massive part of it. We didn't just see a gap in the how-to, though. We saw a complete gap in anyone caring about small business or actively doing anything to support small business. The small business support from a cybersecurity perspective when we started out was the equivalent, and to a large part still, is the equivalent of people looking for slip, slop, slap slogans that they can throw out there. That is an actual active discussion. What's the slip, slop, slap for cybersecurity on small business? The stark reality is that it's just not. It's not going to work. Small businesses have really significant constraints and reliance on technology and technology vendors and everything else that underpins that. And it is a completely unique problem space in terms of how to solve and address that from a cyber risk perspective. And we have an industry and a government who is focused on critical infrastructure, finance, banking sector, large enterprise, or rightly on the broader population and citizens. There's a gap in the middle, and it's a hard place to operate. It's a really challenging problem to try to help and address in. And because of that, it's ignored while the easier, more lucrative aspects of cyber risk are focused on. And so that was kind of, that was us when we started Cynch, we found that. But really the reason that we started Cynch was as a result of that being completely underserved and not addressed. The impacts to a business and a business owner in particular, if an incident or when an incident occurs, is so much bigger and so much more dramatic than you find anywhere else. You think about what a cyber incident or a data breach or a ransomware attack in the context of a small business looks and smells and feels like for the owner, the operator, or the owner of an accounting practice or a law firm, a small one. It's them. They feel that directly. Their family feels it. The families of all of their employees feel it. It's a very direct human impact. In a bank, in Australia Post, where Susie and I met, an incident would occur. It does occur. You have a bad week. You might have a bad month if it's a particularly bad one, but you roll on. There's a team around you. It doesn't, never sort of barely touches the sides in a lot of instances. That's not the case in a small business. And so that was really not just as a completely underserved and there's a massive gap there, but the impacts and the implications of an incident are so much more significant and human. And that was kind of what we've locked onto and driven and built our business to solve for.
So basically the cyber attack that we had back in June was apparently the largest one that Australia had ever had. Apparently it was a shallow one as well. It didn't dig too deep, and we don't really know exactly what was taken, whether or not the guys behind the attack got what they wanted from the attack. But the fact is that as a consequence of that, Prime Minister Scott Morrison came up, made his public announcement and made a number of subsequent announcements saying that he's going to be tightening things up. He's going to be putting more money into cybersecurity at the top end, at the strategic level end. And I suppose if you're a general member of the public watching the nightly news, you would kind of think, okay, great, good on you, ScoMo, you've done it. You've looked at you've stared down the giant and you're going to get on top of this. So therefore we can go about our business as per usual. So it goes back to the whole apathy thing that we were all talking about earlier. I mean, are these public announcements by, the Prime Minister encouraging us to then take the she'll be right mentality, because she's really not that right?
Definitely. It is part of it. Well, it doesn't help solve the problem. I don't think it actually makes the problem any worse. I think the problem would be there irrespective of the announcements. Australians are great at looking for the silver lining in problems. It's part of what makes this country wonderful, but in this particular avenue, it also puts us at great risk and potentially at great harm. I would certainly like to see our leaders across this country giving much more prescriptive advice on the sorts of things that people as individuals need to be wary of. That telling people, being quite prescriptive and saying every time you download an app, actually look at what information you are giving them. When you're introducing a new technology to your business, make sure you consider all of the cybersecurity risks involved in that. Because without that constant reminder, people aren't going to take action. But that's not to say that if we had that everybody would take action as well. Because again, if you're always missing the how to do something and only ever giving the problems in this society, I don't think you're going to get very far.
Adam?
Yeah, so it's an interesting proposition. The act of going out there, raising the alarm, and then very quickly following up with, and now we're going to invest $1 billion into ASD and these other things. Does that translate down into sort of the general population to feeling that she'll be right because ScoMo's got our back, ASD is going to come along and whatnot? I'm sure for some people it does that. I think for others, they'll still see that as, well, I've still got all these other risks and things going on, and that's not really helping me directly. So I don't think that sort of moves the needle on them feeling any less motivated to actually do that. I think the challenge is once people recognize that the risk is there and that they have a direct responsibility to address it, those sorts of announcements and whatnot wouldn't have much of an impact on changing that attitude. Whether or not that delays people getting to that point, that's I guess a question mark. I think it's important for an increased pressure and increasing the awareness and educating the population that this sort of stuff is going on. As Susie said, it shouldn't be strange for the PM to be up there talking about cybersecurity or cyber attacks. We know in the industry they're happening constantly all the time. And the reality was that whilst it was the biggest one sort of that caused the catalyst, it was actually been happening for a long time. It wasn't just an immediate, all of a sudden the attack's on and then it's off. It had been going on for ages. So it had just reached a trigger point where probably a few different factors came into play, and it felt right to get on TV and start talking about it. I'd like to see those factors kind of understood and a little bit more proactivity in terms of raising awareness that this stuff is going out there. The media is very good at latching on to, things that have happened and getting out there, things getting shut down, for all sorts of various reasons when something newsworthy happens. But when's the last time you saw a smaller organization or someone out there talking? There's a stigma around it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be addressed. The government being out there and open about the fact that this stuff happens and incidents occurred will really help shape the community's sort of sense around that. It's interesting. It's a challenging, shifting beast of a problem, really.
Mm-hmm. David.
Adam and Susie, if we have all these small businesses, for example, in Melbourne, who are desperately this week working out how do we get online, how do we do, click and collect, what is the normal path they take to solve this problem? And does that path, in a sense, begin their problem? Do they just look online, get overwhelmed, go to a website they like, see who provides that online service, and just go straight to that company, and that's sort of the end of the whole process?
Close. So most micro and small businesses will have a few different places that they'll go to on advice on technology. And when they need to make these decisions fast, if they can't get onto those people, they'll just move on to the next person. If they can't get onto them, they'll just make a decision. And so those people are obviously outsourced IT support providers. So if they do have an agreement with an MSP or even just their local IT support provider, they might call them up and say, I need to be able to do click and collect. Can you help me? What should I use? There are plenty of, and throughout this pandemic, the number of these groups has expanded exponentially. Facebook groups for various different industries and business owners. So the number of inquiries of, hey, should I use Shopify or should I use this or should I use that? Of course, that has the reliability in terms of the advice that you're getting that you get from a Google search, which is the third option, where they will go to Google and they will type in, online ordering system, e-commerce, or, whatever it might be. And they make the decision that is going to keep their business open tomorrow. There is alarmingly little information out there on the sorts of things that a business owner should be considering when it comes to security when making those decisions. So, the Google search doesn't come up and say, here's your top 3 responses. And, oh, by the way, here's how you might do a mini risk assessment. Like, Google doesn't provide that in the search results. The responses in these Facebook groups don't say, oh, hey, I didn't choose Shopify, I chose whatever solution because I found in my risk assessment that was more secure. That's not a conversation that's occurring. And so, unfortunately, our industry is not present when the discussions and the decisions are being made. Many IT support providers that we have spoken to are very concerned that their small business customers expect them to be solving security when that is not at all what they're employed to do and what they're even skilled to do. And so when a small business owner goes to an IT support provider for a solution and they get given one, they just assume, oh, well, that's okay. Security sorted out. My IT guy did that. And of course he didn't. And so there's lots of assumptions and a complete lack of support for a business owner that needs to make a quick decision, because the places that those decisions are happening, our industry are not there. And I would say we're not there because we're not interested in being there. Adam and I don't bump into too many other cybersecurity people when we're usually the only voices in these Facebook groups. So that can't be because they didn't know they existed. I would say a lot of the time it's because they're not interested in being there.
So what it means is a lot of your industry are simply cleaning up the mess after when this goes horribly wrong, and someone needs to clean up, the hack, and they finally find a cybersecurity organization, to essentially put the universe back together long after the event, long after all the credit card details are gone, long after they've been burned. And it's not just bad for the business, but in the end ends up also being bad for cybersecurity organizations because they get a rep for only being there after the event.
And for being incredibly expensive after the event as well.
Okay. Wow.
Or before the event, if you're there. I mean, if
Yep.
you've ever tried to engage with a security professional, or anyone in the industry around consulting, we're not cheap.
Well, we are. They're not.
Well, that's the thing. I think that's the thing that strikes me as probably your biggest hurdle to overcome, which is that, I suppose, especially if you're dealing with small businesses, and we've talked about their constraints, I think financial constraints are probably some of their most significant, where they're making a decision about a service, say something like Shopify, probably from my financial perspective, where security might have been a consideration if you were looking at two identically priced products. But as soon as you have to pay for something that has higher security, let's say, whether that's the priority, I think that seems to be your biggest hurdle. Is like, okay, well, you're gonna have a more secure platform, but it's going to cost you more. So
yeah, I mean, our approach to it is the technology you choose to use as a business is your business choice. Like, to use Shopify over something else, that is a completely valid business choice, and you should be focused on how does that work best to support my business in the first instance. Like, there's no point talking about or trying to secure something until you've introduced or adopted it in the first instance. Like, you need to get there first, and so many businesses are just trying to get to that point. But the problem is that Shopify and you name technology vendor, they have not designed their product in the first instance to ensure that you go down the most secure path. They've designed their product to make it as easy for you to adopt it and get the value out of it as quickly as possible. So, if you're Shopify, the first thing you want to do is, how quickly can I enable a business to list and sell something and take a credit card online? That's what you're trying to get them to as quickly as possible. Completely valid. You hope then that they come back, and they come back in when things have settled and they're comfortable with it and started using it proactively, and they come in and secure it and turn on all the security features and do all the other things that you wanted them to do if they're not enabled by default. The reality is, what small business has got the time to come back and do that? It's only those that have recognized that that's something that's important. And so we start with, you need to get technology adopted into your business. You find something that's the right price point that does and meets the need that you want it to do. And then we will help you do, as Susie said, do the risk assessment, figure out what's available to you, put things in place. So often it's not, I need to go and get the bells and whistles, something hosted in a secure government cloud that's got all the firewalls enabled. Like, that's not what's required, right? It's make sure that you go in and you don't have people with access that haven't worked for you for 5 years. Make sure that you go in and you're checking some stuff. Enable two-factor authentication if it's available. Things like that. Stuff that is there and ready and be enabled quickly, but you'll never get to until someone suggests or points at it for you. And so that's kind of how we approach it.
And it's interesting you talk about money being a constraint. Both Adam and I, as you mentioned before, came from Australia Post, one of the largest corporates here in Australia. budget of it, whilst naturally it had more zeros than any small business would have, budget was a huge constraint in that large corporate, and it is in every large corporate. Security budgets are never what they should be. Unfortunately, they're just not. In a small business environment, and yes, we have also priced our product knowing our target market, but price is not usually the biggest hurdle for them to overcome. The biggest hurdle for most micro and small business owners is one of two things. Either, first of all, time, as Adam mentioned. Business owners have 1,000 things to do every single day. Security is one of those. On any given day, when does that reach the top of the pile? And so with our solutions, we break all activities and recommendations that we make down into 5-minute steps, so that, if while they're drinking their coffee in the morning, they can jump onto our platform and do something that will make a material difference to their cyber risk in 5 minutes. Because that might be all they have that week, or maybe even that month, to think about security, but at least they're doing something. The other thing is actually their technical knowledge and skill set. So many cybersecurity solutions, if they are meant for businesses and not for individuals, such as just basic password managers or antivirus software, the moment you get anywhere more complicated than that, the skill level and the knowledge required to adopt it and understand it and configure it and get it working is just so damn high. And so small business owners that are lawyers or doctors or whatever, they don't have that technology information and that skill set. And that's why we do the risk analysis for them based on the technology that they have already adopted into their system. And then we give them step-by-step instructions on what it is that they need to do in plain language so that they can do it themselves or in collaboration with their IT support provider. So we have helped small business owners configure DNS records and stuff like that they would never be able to do on their own, and nor should they even try, because who wants to do that unless you've got somebody stepping you through it? So price usually isn't the biggest factor. It's actually the time and the skills.
So I guess, apologies, John.
Sorry.
I guess, you've kind of highlighted that you, in some sense, accept or prefer or at least find it valid for businesses to adopt the kind of technology that they want to adopt or that suits their business in the first place, and then look at securitizing that afterward. For small businesses, let's say, that are starting out, people that are coming into this and they want and have been sufficiently, I don't want to say scared, but
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, scared by all the things that are happening. Is starting with security also a valid kind of approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. We're never going to discourage somebody from thinking about security before they think about usability. That's for sure. But if the software that you choose is so secure that it doesn't actually do what you need it to do for your business, then clearly it's not the right technology for you. So if somebody is knowledgeable enough to know that when they're setting up their company, they have this discomfort that, security is going to be an issue, I want to get it right from the first place, then there is plenty of information out there on the security of each of these different platforms. There's always a place to find the information if you go looking for it. The thing is, they don't make it. They don't, it's not a pop-up on your screen saying, hey, by the way, these are the security things that we have built in. Compare it to all of these other competitors, because who would, the average person isn't going to read that. But the information is actually available if you go searching for it. The big thing is that, and this is the perpetual to and fro when it comes to security, is it's always a question of convenience and usability versus security. And finding the right combination of both is tricky, no matter which technology or what you're trying to do in your business.
Susie, I need to pick you up on that one, because just listening to the discussion so far, it seems to me that putting myself in every man's shoes at the moment and being a small business owner myself, one of the things that, and of course David knows this very well, years of discussions with him on these issues, but I can't say that I'm a particularly technological person. And the thing is that these days it's all about, here's the website, do it yourself. And it's like another burden on top of all the other things that we have to do. And it's so frustrating. And then things change so much. And if you're not on top of all of this, and if no one's giving you the guidance, and it's all about you going to the right website and checking it out yourself, much of the website could be written in Greek, because most of it will not make sense to the average punter out there who just wants to concentrate on the business. They know what they're specialized in. They do not want to take on the mantle of being a tech specialist. Mm-hmm. That's why there are tech specialists. But of course, there is this, do-it-yourself mentality in the current environment, which seems to be very prevalent right now. And I think that it disadvantages a lot of people, because people just, you're absolutely right. They just give up in the end. They think, I'll buy my Norton's package, or I'll buy Apple because Apple's more secure, right? These are the sort of things that seem to be very prevalent in the public, the non-educated cyber public. They want a quick fix. They want to get into their business knowing that they've got the right kind of technology. And of course, the tech companies all play on this. Oh, yeah, the Apple computers are so much better. Well, we know that Apple gets hacked just as regularly as everything else right now, but still they seem to be able to trade off on their hardware. And for people like myself, it's burdensome and difficult to have to go and undertake extra learning on top of all the other bits and pieces that many other businesses have to deal with. And it's very complex. So again, it's almost like a deterrent, isn't it?
There's a lot in that. So I would say, first of all, the first part of your comments there, I think you've just read out our business case and why we exist. So when a small business owner signs up for a Cynch membership, all they need to do is tell us what technology they use, and then we tell them, okay, here's a list of the things you need to worry about and exactly what you need to do to fix that. And you know what? If you don't want to do it yourself, then invite your IT support provider into the platform and allocate it to them. And at least then you've still got visibility of the risks. You can see things being checked off over time, and we keep track of all of those things. If you need it mapped against different compliance standards, we can do that. But otherwise, if you want to say to somebody, that's your job, you can do that within our platform. But the thing about cyber risks is that it's not all technology, or at least the solutions are not all technology. So there are very few technologies out there that can stop somebody from clicking on a link, or can stop somebody from typing in their username and their password into the wrong website. Or, there are all of these human elements that require a business leader to be a business leader. And introduce new processes to teach their staff that these are things that they need to worry about. And we will support them doing that. But unfortunately, that does mean that there are things that you need to do over time. So just like when you buy a car, you don't buy a car and then drive it for 20 years without getting it serviced, without changing the tires, without changing the oil, without filling it up with petrol every week. There's things that you need to do to maintain it, to keep the car being a car.
Let me just stop you there. I knew many years ago a guy who ran a very successful South Australian enterprise. And he was a smart guy. He did his thing very, very well. But he was the kind of guy that got the company car and drove it into the ground, did not worry about, whether or not it needed coolant, didn't worry about oil. It went totally unserviced. Not that he couldn't afford it. It's just that it didn't dawn on him that was something that would be advantageous. And besides, after all, it's a company car. I'll just get another one if this one runs out. So I understand what you say. I also know that in the business community, it's a diverse house, shall we say, and there are many different players out there, and that must be a source of great frustration to a company like Cynch, because you'll know the same thing as we know, but at the end of the day, you're at the coalface. You're going to have to deal and try to convince these guys that, hang on a tick, this is not good standard operation, right?
Yeah, and look, that's we make a very conscious decision that is not our job. So our job is not to convince small businesses that cyber risk is something that they should manage. That's where we come back to, what's the role of government? What's the role of industry? What's the role of other things? Is to highlight and make it clear and help businesses understand the importance of managing their cyber risk. We exist because once they get to that point, and to be honest, a big part of why government and industry bodies and others aren't doing that is because they know that if they were to raise the alarm around cyber risk, where are their members and where are their businesses going to turn? Like, how are they going to solve for that? There aren't solutions. So what we consciously decided was, well, our role, we'll get out there and we'll make it, share the stories and do the things and raise awareness where it makes sense. But really the need exists for those businesses that do realize that they need to change the coolant in their car and, rotate their tires and do all the other things that they should be doing. There's plenty of businesses out there in that position who can't, that there isn't a tire shop. The mechanics don't exist. So we consciously decided to go there, but in getting focusing at that point, we also need to play a proactive role in helping and making aware those organizations and those groups that can continue to raise awareness and sound the alarm around the risk and those types of things. It's not going to be every business, but there's 2 million small businesses in Australia. There's hundreds of thousands of them out there. And even if a small fraction of them get it and are actively looking for solutions, that's our business today. The bet that we make is that every business eventually will be digital, and every business eventually will recognize the need to manage cyber risk, regardless of their size, at some level, and we'll be there to support them when they get there.
With regard to whole of community integration of Australia's cyber domain, we've got federal government, state government agencies that are all required to work with each other. Then, of course, you've got private enterprise that sometimes is, helping the government enterprise get along because they're sort of outsourced to do certain bits and pieces. And then, of course, you've got policing at the other end of the bleeding edge with regard to law and order in the cyber domain. What is, in Cynch's view, the environment for whole of government cyber? I mean, is it good? Are we doing best case in comparison to other OECD countries? Are there even statistics that demonstrate this?
You want to have a go, or me, Adam?
You go. You have a crack.
So I would say here in Australia, the idea of whole of government is a bit of a furphy in the first place. Even just within Victoria, we don't have a Victorian government. We have 1,300 different departments or something like that. And it operates like 1,300 different departments. Then you look at the federal level and it's exactly the same. So this whole idea of whole of government and having a single way forward, I think is a bit of a furphy. And I think evidence of that is the fact that there's only one government department that is compliant with the Essential 8. If there was truly a whole of government approach, they would be at the very least following their own Essential 8 that they published several years ago. The ANAO would not be doing audits on such a regular basis and publishing the results if there was truly a whole of government approach. So I think it's a bit of a furphy. I also think knowing the legacy systems that government departments are dealing with, the budgetary requirements, I think it's not unreasonable for us to be in the state that we're in. But I think it is unreasonable to then position a conversation around whole of government when clearly that is not the reality. But again, that's my personal opinion.
I think, separate to that, it's convoluted at the moment. Everyone's trying to figure out there's been some great work in recent years to bring everything under the sort of ASD umbrella, but that brings with it a particular lens. So everything kind of there in that context and driven towards that. You look at any given state cybersecurity strategy, if and where they exist, or in whatever midst of being redefined and other things, they all have a different focus. They're all geared in a different way. They're all geared towards whatever outcomes that state's government is targeting or driving towards at that given time. I think the fact that everyone's taking it seriously and investing into it and driving it forward in some way is good. But I wouldn't say that everyone's kind of heading in the exact same direction, and maybe they shouldn't. maybe it's okay for different opinions and different things to be done. Just as we wouldn't recommend one business deal with it in one particular way and another business do it the same way. There isn't a magic bullet catch-all. Like Essential 8's fantastic, but it's not going to solve for everything, right? So it makes sense for things to be done in a different way. I think as a nation, we're starting to lock into it and wrap our heads around it and starting to, do the right things to get on top of it. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the next couple of years play out. And I think we're looking towards, as part of, Five Eyes and everything else, we're looking towards our partners in the various other nations that we closely partner with for direction and participating at that level. How that translates down into the broader, economy and everything else going on, it's still a bit of a patchwork, and there's a lot more work to be done there. So it'll be interesting to see certainly how the 2020 strategy plays out and comes up and how they push forward on all of those fronts. But it's, it's a big problem space. So it makes sense to have a lot of different opinions. I don't think, as nice as it would be to be Estonia and have everyone under one sort of guidance and push towards one sort of outcome. We're not that. We're much closer to the US with a whole bunch of different states doing different things around privacy and doing all sorts of things all over the place. Home security over there, home affairs here. It makes sense for everyone to kind of be operating and working through things in their own way with their own lenses and to achieve the outcomes that they feel are appropriate at that level.
Look, I'm going to give you both one final question to answer, and that is with the impending rollout of 5G and obviously Australia's preference not being Huawei as a main provider for obvious reasons. How has this decision made things a little bit more difficult for Australia rolling into the whole Internet of Things? We do need 5G. We need 5G to be affordable. Huawei is apparently a world leader in 5G. Huawei is also apparently very affordable. Now that the government has taken a strategic stand against China, we're all part of that whole US-China trade war situation. This is going to affect how the internet evolves to the next level. Will this disadvantage small to medium enterprises in Australia, say, over the next 5 to 10 years? We'll start off with Susie.
I'm going to defer to Adam because I must admit
Okay.
I quite intentionally stay out of the 5G arguments.
Will it disadvantage Australian businesses? That's kind of the question that we're getting at. So in a sense it will, but it'll impact on specific industry segments. Those that are developing Internet of Things solutions or are reliant on that type of thing, it will feel it more acutely, and hopefully, the government can play a role in offsetting and assisting with that as part of those decisions and whatnot. I think also though, it really, a little bit like we're starting to see in a few different places with manufacturing coming back and becoming more national. It'll be interesting to see what sort of innovation occurs locally or within our market that offsets that as well. So it'll really open up opportunities in that context to sort of help offset that. Having cheap, affordable sort of 5G technology in and around Australia, it would be nice. It will potentially keep costs low from a service perspective and enable us to roll it out quicker and all of those types of things. But I don't know that it would be material, like significant impact. There's plenty of other technologies and solutions out there. We're not we're a reasonably affluent country. We can afford to pay a little bit of a premium on top of that. And obviously someone's made a call at some level that the trade-off of that versus the potential national risk isn't worth it. So I'd say people with far more knowledge and exposure to things than what I would have made a call. Will it have impact on Australian businesses? In part, but I don't think it's certainly nowhere near what we're experiencing with a pandemic, certainly nowhere near what we're experiencing with cybercrime more generally, certainly nowhere near what we're experiencing in every other sort of context. I don't
Every
think it's
summer with bushfires.
Bushfires, everything else that's been going on, it would barely register in that context.
Final questions from David and Tim. Nothing from you guys? All right then. Well, everyone, that's a wrap. And Susie and Adam, thanks for joining us today and for sharing your insights on STRATEGIKON.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to our audience, thanks for listening. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you can subscribe to the audio version of STRATEGIKON through the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. And please like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site, which of course is safe, and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. You can also watch our podcasts on video on the STRATEGIKON Raw YouTube channel, which is also safe. I just thought I had to put that in. Easily accessed by clicking on the link provided on our website. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. If you would like to support STRATEGIKON, remember to check out our merch page. We have a wide variety of items to keep the STRATEGIKON listeners satisfied. Until next time, goodbye.